Hello, my beautiful soul tribe. I cannot wait for this conversation that I just finished up with Cynthia with Discovering Divinity. In this conversation, we really addressed childhood wounds. We talked about autoimmune diseases and how she was able to really navigate 5 autoimmune diseases to help her embrace her medicine, to help her feel more connected, and to also relieve those that disease that was showing up within her body. On top of that, we talk about navigating spirituality, faith crises, along with the dark night of the soul, stepping into what it is that you truly feel called and fulfilled to experience. So, as I said, this is a jam-packed episode, and I cannot wait for you to listen. Are you searching? Are you looking for something new, something different? Are you being called to your ancestral roots? The Modern Sages podcast is a tribe of women that believe in exploring beyond the broken constructs of society. We believe in empowering women to embrace the medicine within, all with an open mind, baby. Cynthia, I am so grateful and so honored that we're finally getting this all set up. I know it's taken us a little while to get going, which I feel like timing is definitely so important. And there's, of course, timing in everything. So I'm just excited to dive in. So, Cynthia, let's just get started. Let's just have this amazing conversation. And, you and I have met, we've had some sessions together. And it's been so fun to see your growth as far as who you are, connecting to your ancestors, your spiritual gifts, just your way of life. It's just fun to have seen all those changes throughout the years. So I'm excited to share who you are and share your unique medicine with the Soul Tribe.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm super excited to be here. And like I said, for me, it's been an exciting journey. And I look forward to sharing with the audience today. So thanks for
Yay.
having me.
Of course. I just think that there's so many people out there who have gone through a lot of maybe what you've experienced in life, and we'll definitely dive into that. And that's why I'm so passionate about showing that there is so many ways of bringing in healing, so many ways of becoming empowered and really embracing that call, embracing that thing that makes us feel alive and that thing that brings us excitement. And one thing that I love with you is you're constantly embracing the changes, embracing the cycles and the letting go and the learning of the lessons. It's really little by little and it's just unraveling. And so I kind of wanted to dive into that space of unraveling and how you got to where you're at today, as well as kind of the lessons you've learned along the way. Is that all right with you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Well, let's start where we always begin at childhood, because as we know, childhood is such a magical time for many, but it's also where we have a lot of deep wounding, a lot of this expression of how we actually stand up in life as adults really is dictated by experiences in childhood. So let's dive into that.
Absolutely. So, when I am sharing with my audience, I like to share a little visual. And so I'm going to first take your audience on a little ride, and I like to call a ride of life. And so if you can imagine standing on the side of a street and seeing a bus show up, and on the front of it, it says the ride of life. And if you remember those school buses, I like to imagine these big yellow school buses, the door opens and you start to walk up those stairs, have a seat in the back of the bus. And when you're riding, you actually look through the windows and you're taking a ride on all of the memories, all of the experiences that you've ever had. And as you're looking at these experiences and these memories, many of those things can feel really positive, and many of those experiences can maybe be negative. And while you're riding on this bus, if you remember back in the day when you rode a school bus, do you remember looking at the driver and they had this mirror to make sure that they could check on everyone in the seats.
Yes, and they always
So,
had some kind of little sticker or something up there that I was always
yes.
love to look at.
Yes. So this is you riding on this bus of life, and you look in the mirror and you see the driver's eyes looking at you. But what you realize is that driver is your inner child. And when you think about most of our experiences today that we're going through, or experiences that how we are navigating today's, life, most of that is determined by the inner child. And perhaps, many of your audience members have studied the mind and studied the unconscious, studied the subconscious mind, but most of our consciousness is 5 or less percent. And so subconscious, unconscious is navigating. And so it's like an inner child driving that bus. And so, of course, we're not going to let that inner child drive the bus. And so we're going to run up to the front and say, hey, I'm here for you. Let me drive the bus. And that's really where we're empowered to show up for that inner child. And that's what I love about inner child work, is that we're able to show up for that part of ourselves and be the driver. And so, yeah.
I love that because I don't know about you, but I've had so many weird little dreams of like literally me as a child, like trying to get someone maybe to the doctors or the hospital or whatever, but I'm like literally this little kid driving in a bus. So I'm just like laughing to
Wow.
myself because I've had that so many times, but it's so stressful. It's like, are the cops gonna
Yes.
catch me? Am I gonna do like it's so I'm just laughing in my head because I've had those dreams so many times and I'm
Yeah.
always worried and I always get pulled over and I wake up and I'm like, right when the cop's gonna come and get mad at me, I wake up. And I've had it like probably 6 or 7 times.
Well,
It's
and
so
typically,
funny.
yeah, no, I love that because when we're in that state of REM, we're actually processing things that have happened in our life. And so our brain sometimes puts things together in an interesting way. And so there's probably a deeper message that
Right.
your psyche is trying to send to you, but that's the subconscious and unconscious layers that we're working with. And I'm so passionate about it because I've had to personally go through my own inner child experiences. I've had to run up to the front of that bus and say, I'm here for you. I'm not going to, let you drive the bus. I'm going to protect you. I'm going to keep you safe. Right.
Let me scoot in so the cops don't get you in trouble.
Right. Right. And so there's a part of that inner child that wants to be rescued, that wants to be completely enveloped when we go through these traumas and experiences. And so I share that. I don't know if they're called metaphors or what they are, but it's this visual experience of the way that I kind of experience the whole inner child inner work that we all are called to do, because that's most of unconscious and subconscious experiences. And so, it was with my own early childhood trauma that allowed me to kind of go through this first, breaking of a foundation, breaking of something that felt safe and secure for me, into, as a young toddler, having to go through some dark shadows. And so that came through the experience of losing my dad at an early age. It was around the age of 20 months old when he passed away from a sudden heart attack. And I was so connected to my dad, even though I don't have visual memories of him. It's hard to explain. I have a deep spiritual connection to this man. And when that happened, most people don't think that a child that young can have such a traumatic experience to the psyche. But I've gone and I've done so much research on the mind and the psyche and healing trauma and early childhood trauma, as well as being in utero and the womb are such powerful times for us where we do experience trauma, and doing that inner work is so important. And so with that, early abandonment, even though he didn't leave in a negative, traumatic way, I still experienced abandonment, and he left. And that was a message to a deeper sense of rejection. And my mother, she left, or she had 3 children under the age of 10, and I was the youngest. And she did anything that she could, in the 70s and 80s to go into survival mode. And so there wasn't a lot of counseling. There wasn't a lot of grief work that was really welcomed into, a healing paradigm at that time. It was just basically pull your bootstraps up and survive. And so really as a child, I didn't receive, that emotional support, and she shut those memories out of my dad. We really didn't talk about him. We didn't celebrate his life, and she just survived. And so at the time, losing my father, I also lost that emotional connection with my mom. She basically shut that part of herself off. And so dealing with abandonment and rejection from both parents early on was a layer for me that I had to start to uncover.
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful thing that, I love how you're saying that even in the womb, there are things that we're constantly picking up on. And I think that's the beautiful thing about stepping into the spiritual realm of things, is really being able to see that everything is connected. And before we come, while we're here, after we leave here, everything is so connected, and there's this flow, this connection of all things. And it just reminds me of this soul contract that you and your father have together, is even though he wasn't there for you, you felt so connected to him. And I feel like there are so many of us who maybe have a relative or an ancestor. It might not be a parent, but for some reason, we've always been so close to them, even if we haven't really known them. And I
Absolutely.
just think it's beautiful that we have that space of being able to dive into those soul contracts. And I know that you have definitely deepened your connection with your father in that space and really allowed healing to take place. And it's, of course, the layers, it's the unraveling of going through all of that. Especially as a sensitive human being, as a sensitive child, it can feel so overwhelming. And I too myself, I didn't lose a parent, of course, but have had those times where I felt rejected, or I rejected myself in ways. And as I've stepped into my own unique spiritual gifts and into my adult life, it was almost like I stood at these cross points of, I have to dive in and I have to look at these things because it's making me feel anxiety or depression, or I'm feeling less alive inside, or it can fester, it can show up. And so even just acknowledging maybe where those wounds could start as a child, I feel like that's a great place for those who are barely even diving into childhood trauma and experiences and stories can really take place. Is even just acknowledging those hard things, or maybe when we didn't feel like we were supported, or we were cared about, or we were loved, or we were heard, in that perspective.
Absolutely. And, I had a lot of things pop into my mind as you were talking about that, because my dad really did have, intricate part of that healing journey. He's always been connected to me, and, it was interesting to me, and we'll get to that in a minute, but if you'll remember to come back full circle, is my dad passed away when he was 37 and I was, near 20 months old. And so it was interesting to me, jump over to this next layer at age 37 for me, when my daughter was right around 20 months, was when I had a layer to really peel back and to connect in and to do some deep grief work. But we'll come back to that in a minute. Yes, as we're kind of peeling these layers. But
It's like Shrek,
yeah,
you know?
yeah.
What was he saying about the
Absolutely.
onion? He's like, onions
Yes,
have layers.
that's right. And that's what we're doing.
Yes.
That's, you know, as far as like with, my passion and being able to help clients and individuals really peel back those layers. They really are, a mask of lies. They're illusions that have created, this disconnect or this forgetting of who we are, and the endless searching, because with that early rejection, that abandonment, I was constantly searching for that love, that approval, early on in my life. And so that is where we kind of get to show up. We get to run up to the front of that school bus or that bus of sorts and say, you have all the love you've ever wanted. You're always connected to pure love of this infinite well that is always there to support you. And that's, those deeper layers of the subconscious that I love helping individuals peel back, because they're just a forgetting, they're just a mask. And once we can get into those layers, then do you become in alignment with who you are in your path on the planet. So
It's
yeah,
so
so
beautiful.
true.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So with that being said, I know you were mentioning how sometimes things show up to give us messages,
Yeah.
not only in the womb and in the utero, like we have at least 7 generations in our DNA imprint that we're carrying once we've been conceived. And then, so that's a lot of stuff just to be
It's a
carrying
lot.
in the womb.
Right.
And then once we're born, we start to have these experiences. And for me, when my mother went into survival mode and just could not handle, talking or experiencing the memories of my dad, she tried to build this new life while I was feeling like a piece of my existence and my heart had been torn out of me, and no way to process that as a sensitive child, because it just appeared to me that everyone was moving on with their life. Everyone was doing their thing. My mom remarried. Everyone was just, no one felt their emotions. And yet I felt everything. I was like an emotional sponge, and I could feel all of these things, and it was so hard to navigate. And I noticed early on, probably around the age 4 or 5, that my body started to give me messages where there were indications of possibly autoimmune that wouldn't be discovered until probably my 20s. And
Yeah.
so I
Our
that
it goes back to everything being connected, and those things which I feel are our calling in life is also our greatest strengths, are also where we are the most wounded, where we
Mhm.
have the most heaviness, where we it's so interesting because it's like this human journey is all about embracing the shadows. It's all about going into that space. We hear about the hero's journey, and in every movie, we're always rooting for them to get, they're at this high point. They have to dive into this heartbreak, this darkness to reclaim who they were, to know what they want, and then they come back on top. And we watch it all the time in movies and in books, and yet we forget that that's also what we're here to explore and to experience. And so
Well,
I see that within you too.
oh, thank you. Yeah, it's, when we understand the laws of the universe and we understand that law of polarity, it is the light, it is the dark, however you want to do, the vibrational frequencies, in order to really fully embrace that space of love, or any other, rainbows and butterflies, feeling, we go into these paths, these really dark shadows that help us really go deep to uncover ourselves and to come back into that true alignment of, like I said, that
Yes.
infinite space of love.
Yeah.
But when we learn to go through those experiences, without guilt or shame or fear or believing that something's wrong, and we really recognize the lessons really all, that's all they are lessons. their experiences, and they're there to show us, what we desire to experience on the planet. There's things that we want
Yeah,
to learn and come through.
absolutely. I agree with 100% all of that. It's so perfect. I am super interested as you're speaking. You mentioned a little bit about autoimmune and how that was showing up for you. I would love to hear more about that because I do have a story too to share with that that is popping up in my mind that I don't really share much about. But I would love to hear your
Yeah.
experiences. You've talked about being super sensitive and how did that show up for you? But how also were you able to navigate that?
Yeah. That has a lot of details. So I can go as deep or keep it as surface level as you'd like. But, the first indications for me were was an experience when I was around the age of 4 or 5 of having to be taken to the hospital, not being able to walk. And throughout my life, I just started to have really odd symptoms, just weakness, fatigue, just like overstimulation, just so much going on around me that it was hard for me to navigate my body, some inflammatory indications, but no one was ever able to really give me clarity throughout my childhood, my teenage years. And so it was just something I dealt with. And then it really put me into full impact in my early 20s when I got married, because right away, I went into childbearing years, and, with the shift of hormones and everything, my body started to go into a full shutdown mode because I was providing nutrients for baby. And I had so many things going on. And so that was my first indication of autoimmune, and eventually had the diagnosis of 5 autoimmune disorders. And so really it was the path early in my 20s that set me on, a research to go, okay, I've got these diagnoses, and really being incredibly ill, trying to take care of these babies, trying to be a wife, having all kinds of stressors in a relationship, financially, and not only with autoimmune comes anxiety and depression. And so debilitating. I was having 10 to 15 panic attacks a day. And it really got to the point that my body was shutting down and I couldn't walk to the bathroom by myself. It got to the point that, I remember my mom having to come and physically help take care of me and my kids. And it was in that space of my life that I felt kind of a fierce determination within me to say, I have more to do on the planet. I am not meant to be sick for the rest of my life. And so I went on that healing journey to uncover holistically what it was going to take to heal me, because I had a bad experience with doctors trying to drug me. And I'm so sensitive that drugs were horrible for my body. Like I could not handle the medications. And so I knew that I needed to go a different route. I knew that I needed to be alive for my children, and I wanted that. And it was just something within my soul that made me get onto this space where I researched and I researched and I researched, which brings me to the point that I am here, at this particular time, and having decades of life experience, life changes, that now to this day, you would never know that I had experienced autoimmune. And so that's it in a nutshell, but I've done so many things to kind of navigate, coming through that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So did you focus on like changing diet? Did you focus on more was it more holistic? Was it meditation? Was it body work? Like what did you find that was like your starting point of finding relief in all of that?
Initially, there in my 20s, there had been a medical practitioner that had really overloaded my system with drugs. And so the starting point for me was to get off of those medications. And
Mm,
so I did go the physical route initially, because I had to start shifting things in my diet. Like that's huge for autoimmune, is inflammatory producing foods, um, things with food dyes, chemicals. And that was a starting point. I had to do a lot of extra supplementation, things that were going to help my body start to heal. And that's so in depth, right? Because we all have our own blueprint. But
right.
for me, that was the process of going, okay, what do I need to do physically? But then I also had to work with the emotions. I had to dive into the mental realm. I had to work with spirit. I had to work with energy. And so that's a great place to be. That's going to make huge changes for an individual. But we also have to look at the aspects of where we've buried traumas, where we've buried these wounds, because they're all interconnected. And that for me, I had to find out on a holistic level what the right balance was for me. And so I needed to go in and do a lot of trauma work. I needed
Yeah.
to focus on inner child work. And those all together, were kind of that culminating part that brought everything together. And so to share it in
Yeah.
a 10-minute, okay, this is what you need to do, you know,
Well,
I'm like, it's been a process,
everybody
right?
is, yeah, and everybody is different in that space. It's so interesting because in my grandma's side, on my dad's side, a lot of autoimmune disease is prevalent. Um, and it's so funny. This is all coming full circle even today. I've been learning more about your ancestral bloodlines and how
Mm-hmm.
everything is connected through that. And so anyways, I want to start teaching a class about that. So I pulled cards to connect into my grandma on my dad's side. And I think that sometimes cards can be a great way for us to just get, it's just like a good, for me it just opens up the idea of something, and then I'll journal and write and things will just come in. Um but it was so fascinating because I had this experience where I was looking into 1, 2, 3 generations back, and it was connecting into this space of trauma and this space of like a lot of sexual shame that, of course, growing up in a strict church community, that was like you were taught that, that's the next greatest sin towards murder. Quite literally, you're taught that. And I just remember, like, as I first got married and trying to navigate all of that, like, you're told, "Oh, you can't even have any desire. That's super bad." And then all of a sudden you're married and you're just supposed to be able to just be okay with everything. And
Yes.
I remember laying in the bathtub one night and just like trying to figure out my trauma with it all, trying to navigate my own personal experiences. And I so clearly remember having my ancestors like kneeling by the tub by me. It was very interesting. But I literally could choose at that point if I was going to let this trauma and this heaviness of sexual shame create an autoimmune disease within me. And I was
Wow.
given the choice, are you going to choose this in this lifetime or are you not going to? And I was shocked at how prevalent and how powerful that was for me. And I was like, I don't want to have that. And I could just
Right.
feel my ancestors being like, like breathing, like trying to help me choose what direction
Yes.
I wanted to take. And even
Mm-hmm.
today, I was like pulling these cards and it brought this. I'm like, I don't even want to deal with this. I don't want to talk. I don't want to, like, I just don't want to deal with this right now. And so I even just like started writing a little bit. And then I'm like, I'm just going to sit with this. And so it's funny that it's all coming full circle as we're speaking right now,
I
as
love
even
that.
that being a choice of like, and that's kind of bold to say, like, oh, that was a choice, but really it was. It was
Yes.
crazy.
No, I love that, because as I've worked with so many individuals as well as done my own work and seen, like, firsthand the ability that we have to shift at a cellular level, and our bodies, our hearts, minds, spirits, energy center, like we have the ability to heal. And to have been able to stepped into that space where, yes, we do have agreements. We do have contracts of where we do come to the planet to experience something or to learn
Mhm.
something. But when I was going through, that dark, dark space of going, this is not who I am supposed to be on this planet. There was like a fierce fire from within
Mhm.
that I knew something way more powerful than me, that I created a new paradigm. I created that space to say no more in the generational line. Because when I did show up and I was working with ancestors, I remember very specifically certain ancestors that would come in through healing work that I would do that carried these stories of autoimmune, anxiety, depression, very, very dark places. And I felt like I was really a very important piece to go, okay, we can choose something differently.
Right.
And that comes in our connection to our divine ability to create. We don't realize how innately powerful we are to say, I am stepping away from this agreement. I delete it, I cancel it, and I'm letting go. And so I loved that you shared that story of such a personal experience where your ancestors were there. I feel like they're so interconnected to us.
Yeah.
And they're here working with us, because I did have a personal experience with my dad, and several other ancestors and a sister that I have, that I realized they're here. I mean, we're connected. Our DNA is, we're all working through these lessons together.
Right.
And so I love that you shared that.
Yeah, it's powerful, and it's almost like in those times too. Like I said, those strengths can also become our greatest. They can feel like our setbacks, our weaknesses, our stressors, but it also is what helps launch us into healing. And so many people who are into the healing world or into body, soul, mind connection, really into the spiritual realm, like we talked about this morning, so many people have been pushed into a dark night of the soul to
Mm-hmm.
help them embrace that medicine. To say, I literally have nowhere else to go. I don't know what to do. And so I'm going to open up this new option. And not only does it help bring healing or it brings that medicine to activate within someone, it's also their medicine in the world. But then
Absolutely.
there's
Mm-hmm.
layers of it, right? It's like who I was starting mediumship 6, 7 years ago is completely a different person than who I am now. My beliefs, the way I channel, the way I connect, the way I present myself is completely different. But going back to that girl who started that long ago, that was where I needed to be to get to where I'm at now. And so I feel there's so much respect for her, even though I'm like, oh, I probably wouldn't have done that or this or that. But all of those things led up into this point. And I don't know, I just think that it's easy for us to get caught in we need to be in this place or I can't believe I did that. And we can even shut down there. Like, it didn't work out for me then. So why would I try it again? But it's this unraveling, it's this peeling back these layers. And there may be, if you're peeling back an onion, right? There may be a part that has all of the brown or the gunk that's there. Even if you pull back a few layers, it's going to still be there. But it's part of the onion, right? It's part
Yes.
of the experience. And that's what we came here to fully embrace.
Yeah. And I think once we can start to shift our perception with our experiences, as I've done, a lot of inner child work personally and with many other individuals, there's so many different themes that individuals are clearing and they're trying to pull up from the ancestors, because whether I've worked with a client's inner child or an ancestor's inner child, it really comes into that space of I'm not good enough, a self-hatred energy. that I
Right.
think, are some of those darkest shadows. Those are the parts of those dark night of the souls, um, from whatever trauma or experience that maybe our ancestors went through or we personally went through, that disconnect us from that pure love source and that innate space of who we are. And so, that being said, with that messaging, it really is going into some of those dark spaces of feeling helpless, feeling hopeless, feeling rejected, feeling like so dark in that deep space, that's when we do rise. Like we come back into that connection, just like you said, because
Yeah.
that really is, those shadow sides, especially with our, you and I are both sensitive human beings. And so
Yes.
feeling so much that goes around us and being so connected to other people for a long time, when I didn't know how to navigate my body, I didn't know how to create boundaries, I didn't know how to process the energy. um, the body became sick. Like the body
Mm-hmm.
didn't know how to process that. And so with my own traumas, my ancestors DNA imprint, and then everyone else's stuff that I was trying to carry, my body was shutting down. But when we learn to recognize what that is and go into that space and use healthy boundaries, learn how to protect ourselves, that's when our bodies can do the work.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting as well because it's this opening up, and we might feel like, oh, I've healed that, and then it comes back in a different layer or a different level.
Absolutely.
And I also see that we almost like have these things to prepare us for the next onset of spiritual growth. And
Absolutely.
I know
Yeah.
you and I both have been kind of in this transition of really being pushed into this space of what is it that I believe, and what is it that makes me feel connected to the divine, and what
Mm-hmm.
is the divine, and how can I connect into the source of what divine is. um, Shedding layers of childhood experiences of how things are shared and how they have to be and what that has to look like, and really stepping into this faith empowerment space of, well, who am I? What do I believe? If I have the power to be able to help people connect and to heal, not that I'm the one having to do the healing, but I'm a channel of this light, of this love, and seeing that there's so much more out there. I feel like you and I both have been, in our own way navigating what this uprising or this space within us feels like. And it almost seems that, we both have had these experiences, and those in the soul tribe who, those dark nights of the soul help launch us into that medicine, but also it helps us have thicker boundaries, stronger space to be able to navigate when something else shows up, because it always will. Part of human
Yes.
life. What's your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, it's the way that I look at it, especially when I'm working with clients. I'm like, okay, buckle up because you're on a roller coaster, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
life. And when we can start, looking at life as this adventure, we're going to have these polarities, we're going to have these experiences, that makes some of the shadows a lot easier. Doesn't make them go away. They're going to be there. But for me, as we've kind of talked about some of these layers, that early childhood trauma, some of those wounds of my ancestors, and then autoimmune anxiety, all of those things that I was called to say, okay, let's shake this up and let's face it
Mm-hmm.
and let's heal it. That really prepared me then for, a layer, another dark night of the soul, but then prepared me for another one. Because you think, oh, the dark night of the soul is just going to be one thing. But like I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, when I was talking about when I turned 37, you realize in my 20s was when I started to get like these actual complete diagnoses of autoimmune. So I was being
Yeah.
taught in layers when I was the age of 30. That's when I remember being in my bed going, I don't know if I'm going to live or die. And going, dark night of the soul, right? I've had many of these experiences. And so at age 37 was when my daughter was the same age I was, that all of that trauma of being a young child and losing her dad was called to go in another shaking of the energy and to face some dark shadows, face some of those experiences, to go, okay, you've got another layer to look at this and to lean in and to heal. And so as I did that, like, that was a beautiful uncovering for me to have. I had gone through my entire life always yearning and wanting to be close to my dad, but I always felt like I had a hole in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was in one of those dark shadow moments, I remember walking around my neighborhood just in the dark and feeling so alone, so helpless. But then I remember as I was walking, I felt on both sides of me angels, I felt healer guides, I felt all of this love coming from a higher power than was me. And I walked in that energy and I felt such comfort and such peace in such a dark space.
Mm.
And then at that moment, I felt arms. That's the only way I can describe it. I felt spiritual arms wrap around me. And I felt so close to my dad at that time. That was the first time I had felt his presence, in where I had finally moved into a space where I didn't have to grieve him anymore. I could celebrate his life. And so walking in that very dark, dark shadow, I felt his presence. And so that really was a confirmation to me that I wasn't alone in that space of going, oh, there's nothing beyond this. Like that strengthened my connection to divine. And that'll lead me into the next part of my story. But is there anything you'd like to say up to this point? Because that'll get me into this
Yeah,
further
no,
navigation.
I think let's just keep going.
All right. That sounds good. So
But take a drink of water first when we talk a lot. We
let
have
me
to.
do that. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, like I said, I think sometimes we expect butterflies and roses. And as I've really embraced like going through some of these experiences and understanding the deeper message, understanding what it is, like what the universe wants me to gain, and understand what it is my soul wanted to understand from being on planet Earth and inhabiting this physical experience.
These meat suits, these meat
Yes.
suits of density.
Right. Yes. And it's been such a ride. And there are some parts of my life that I'm like, no, I would never want to go back and live that again, because that was some of the hardest parts of life that I've ever been through. And unless we had probably 5 more hours, there's no way I could get into the details of how dark that space was for me. But really going through that next layer, like I said, I've had many, many layers that have taught me little by little to say, here, you're ready for this. I've also had those masks removed. I've had those deeper levels of enlightenment. I've had those greater spaces of awareness that really brought me to a part of my life of really understanding what divine meant to me. And as I've done this shadow work, as I've looked into all of the layers of inner child, ancestral healing, I've uncovered, this part of myself that realized that this connection, we have always been connected. It's always a part of who we are. It's a source that's infinite. It never runs out. And unless I had to go through that abandonment, that rejection, that self-hatred, that I'm not good enough, like running into these perfectionistic experiences, belonging to systems that perpetuated fear, guilt, obligation, shame to make me believe that I was never good enough. Unless I went through that, I wouldn't have had to uncover what I truly, within my soul, know the divine is, and know what that is for me. Because when I did go through another dark night of the soul, when I had those masks peeled off, I was able to really debunk so many of these illusions, so many of these lies.
Yeah.
When I had to go into that deep space, because early on in my, just when I was a baby, a foundation fell apart for me. And I had to like search, and I explain it as kind of like this black abyss of going, where do I have to land? Right. And so in each of these layers, I had these black abyss energies of going, I feel alone. Like, what am, a helplessness of going, what am I supposed to do? And it being really an utter hell of sorts is the only way I can describe it. And that really did prepare me for ultimately coming to this next space where all of my foundations fell apart. I really had to investigate those parts of myself and my ancestors who never felt good enough. They were all of these things, and as I've worked with clients to start to discover these themes of ultimately coming back to, I am not good enough, endlessly chasing for this space when
This
I've been
promise
able
of
to,
fulfillment or of suffering in this life to have peace in the next life.
yeah, but what I realized was it's already here.
Yeah.
It's here. And I am more than enough. I'm enough in those shadow parts of myself. I'm enough in the light, butterfly and rose parts of myself, the rainbows and roses. And I realized that pure love source is within us. And when we connect to that innate source, and we're held by it, we're loved by it, we know that we're more than enough. That's when the healing comes. And we learn to love ourselves too.
Yeah, and it can be fun and exciting. It doesn't have to be so worrisome and heavy. I mean, there are heavy times, but when we take a step back to see things in that perspective of we are always connected to the divine. There is a yin and yang, positive, negative, light, dark. That's part of this duality of being human, of being in this body. But also, I feel that it's important for people to also see that there are gates. There are human perspectives, and we have them ourselves with childhood wounds. There's organizations, there's religions, there's schooling systems that pull us back or that disconnect us from truly feeling that ultimate infinite source of wisdom that's within us. That we're taught we have to do this, or we have to go to school from this time to this time, and you have to make this much money, or you have to do these things to be, like a normal citizen, you could say. And there's also that gating of what we have to believe, or we have to do this or pay this or experience that or do all these things to be able to have God love us, when in truth God is us and we are God.
Yes.
And we're just love.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no gatekeeping because it's here. It's what it is. It's who we are. But it's hard to unravel and to navigate when we're taught so many things that might feel contrary when we finally feel connected. Like, that doesn't feel
Absolutely.
right with me. What? I don't understand that. How does that even make sense? But that's also
Yes.
part of the human world. It's part of the density. It's part of this experience. And I myself have been, this space of unraveling, of growing, of looking at things. And I have found so much compassion and love for having feminine and masculine divine support, because there
Yes.
is both, and both is beautiful, and there's purpose for both. But
Yes.
sometimes we forget about one side of it.
Yes. Well, and I love that you brought that up because, it's brought me to think of a couple different things because of the work and the layers that I went through with inner child work, ancestral healing, and this intuitive, work that I do with clients, going through, the last dark night of the soul that I went through, because I've been through more than one. It really created this space for me to be absolutely passionate about that divine feminine and divine masculine energy. And what I had realized was that we have existed in a society for thousands of years that has been based off of a reward and a punishment system. If you think about the story of Santa Claus, and you
Right.
think about how parents use Santa Claus to manipulate and to also encourage children to be good all year long, right? It's this, being that can see you when you're sleeping, know when you're awake, know if you've been bad or good, for goodness sake. And we are terrified. It's based off of fear. It's based off of
Yeah.
manipulation. It's based off of shame to control another human being into choosing a paradigm or a system that exists within a box. And that's what we have experienced and has been perpetuated for thousands and thousands of years. And it's been based off of a toxic, I use this word very carefully, but a toxic patriarchal structure. Because even as we study human history and we go back through time and we study the master, Jesus, on the planet, when we go back into like the pure roots of a Christ being, or we even look, I mean, there's so many beautiful ascended masters that we can learn from, not
Yes.
just Jesus Christ, but in a society with systems that are based off of reward and punishment and manipulation and fear and shame to keep you in a box, to keep you controlled, that is done under this toxic system. And it has turned into systems like religion, where God is a male God. There's no connection to that divine feminine energy. And so for me personally, I feel like that's a disservice for the intricate part of our healing. We have the feminine and masculine that is within all of us. And to only have, a very male type of energy, in religion, but also society, it's a very control oriented experience.
Well, we're
We,
taught that, we go to school from this time to this time.
right.
When you get out of you have what, 12 years of that, and then you go to college and you do the same thing, and then you're taught
Mm-hmm.
you have to get a job from 9 to 5. You have to have the certain cars, you have to have the houses, you have to have the credit card debt, you have to have all these things to fit the society, to fit the norm. It's so crazy. It's
Mm-hmm.
so mind-blowing. And on top of that too, I have been really passionate about learning about plant medicine and plant wisdom, and how Mother Earth has given us herbs to heal, and people can do sacred ceremony with certain plants with the intention of it bringing in soul healing. That when you're talking about the structure, it came in and it was just like, you can't look to someone who has wisdom about the plants, because if you go to them, you're going to be damned because they're
Mm-hmm.
damned. And then all of a sudden, even I think Western medicine is perfect. There's a lot of goodness to it. But even that is based upon that structure of this like this masculine patriarchy. You have to do
Mm-hmm.
this and do that and do this. The women in the past were the ones who were the midwives who would do the birthing. And then all of a sudden, because that was not okay, because they were doing energy and healing and in your body and all kinds of stuff, all of a sudden it's like, no, you have to go to a doctor who studied it, but who never actually gave birth to understand the
Right.
birthing process. But yet that's
Right.
what we have to go off of. And of course, there's beauty because there's so many aspects where it can bring in healing, but there's this balance of bringing both together so that we can have full, proper healing, because there is a place for all of it,
Absolutely.
as long as it's serving the individual and not holding them captive or causing harm to
Right.
somebody, is what I believe.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's important for us to understand, especially in, these thousands of years. I mean, we've existed for so much longer, but when we look at just, the past 4,000 years, and you look at the structures of the masculine and the feminine energies, and you look at when Christ was on the planet, you look at how all of that was really taken away. Like when we look into even books in, the Bible, we've studied and we've seen that women and their voices were taken out of the Bible, and there's a beautiful part of masculine energy. Like, I'm not saying that that's a negative thing, but what has happened is when you look at thousands and thousands of years, when humanity started to go through civilization, and there was that domination of man over woman because they were the stronger sex, that's when we started to see rape. That's when we started to see concubines. That's when we started to see this demise and this mistreatment of women. And it was all about control. It was all about overpowering, and the woman's voice was shut down. Like when we study, all of the women that were even burned at the stake, for using their spiritual gifts. This is a very toxic energy, and it's been perpetuated through thousands of years. And so we're in a severe imbalance. We're in a severe imbalance that's perpetuated by this shame and fear and control.
And the hard thing with that too is that it's so ingrained in our bloodstream, it's so within our blood lineage, that when someone does say, hey, I want to step into the space, I want to embrace that the spiritual gifts that I have, I want to step into this area of who I am, if it doesn't look like it's supposed to, or if all of a sudden we're in this space of like shit, what do I believe,
Mm-hmm.
what resonates with me and what doesn't, and then all of a sudden maybe someone who was looked at as someone you could look towards who was really faithful in their devout place, all of a sudden they're like, I'm going through this dark night of the soul and I don't know what I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And on top of that, it's like this energy of like, okay, what do I believe? How do I want to feel this? How do I connect into the divine? What feels right for me? But then it's like a whole nother level of being able to share or being authentic in that space outside of it, because
Mm-hmm.
those around us are also taught it has to be this way and you have to do this and you have to do that. So it's almost like we've also been preconditioned at a young age to have to seek approval outside of ourselves, which
Well, yeah.
also holds us back. It keeps us captive from fully embracing our own unique spiritual truth. And so
Yeah.
it's so interesting but that's been done for, like you're saying, thousands of years. It's like
Oh,
you
yes.
can't align with that, because if it doesn't match this system, then it isn't okay. Or if you
Absolutely.
don't go to college, you can't get jobs at certain places, even though maybe those degrees they didn't even freaking learn anything about it, and yet they're
Thousands and
thousands of
thousands of
dollars in debt
dollars. Yes.
to serve the system of work, pay, right?
Right. It's a system of doing, right?
Yes.
We're not living in the system of being.
And I feel like there's been a huge shift since 2020 of so many people being like, I want to be, my soul came here to experience more. And it just feels like our ancestors are like pleading at this time for us to come and cleanse the bloodline, for us to come and cleanse the heaviness, the structure of what it is, what it isn't. But it's going to take, I almost feel like us stepping forward and us just like embracing and helping people heal and healing ourselves. I feel like that's the starting point. But I really feel like there's like a few generations from us like to come
Absolutely.
from us. It's
Mm-hmm.
also going to be really integrating in this space of embracing the feminine and the masculine, because sometimes we can go too far one way that we forget
Mm-hmm.
that there is balance, there is yin and yang, and that's literally a law of the universe, and it's not going anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we've been one way, we're going one way, but it's like I feel like within 3 generations it's going to be like really helping find a more steady balance in between.
Yes. And that's what I've observed too is, we had such an extreme, part of the pain wound of where we have been in toxic patriarchy. We've been in this violating, intense, controlling shame paradigm. And so what's happened is you've had a pendulum that's come from here, and now we have a lot of rage, we have a lot of anger, and that's perfect for the journey. Like that's perfect for,
Right.
we need the pendulum to swing all the way over here in order to create almost like an earthquake of energy, so that then we can come back into the sacred union. It's that balanced divine feminine, the balanced divine masculine energy, because we need both. And that's what I feel so passionate about, helping people integrate, is we've survived so long on the planet to where the masculine energy, even though it's got really beautiful attributes, as does the feminine, but both of those energies have very toxic patterns. And so when we can ultimately learn how to balance the two, that's when healing of consciousness comes. And so systems that are so enmeshed with shame and control and fear are falling apart. They will continue to crumble. They will continue to fall apart, because that is a system that doesn't work. You think about the Santa Claus story, right? How many of you have done things based off of fear and shame?
Right.
Like it's not a natural movement, but when you can fully connect into that pure love source and light, you naturally want to show up on the planet in love. And when we can just hold that space of love, we naturally want to serve, we naturally want to give to other people. But it's that fear-based mentality that will not survive. And the younger and younger generations know this. Like they've come to the planet and they are not buying into the manipulation. They just don't. And that's a thing for me, as of this particular time when we're doing this podcast, 46 years old, I've lived a lot into that deeply ingrained, systematic, you do it this way because I tell you to do it this way. And there's no other way to do that. So being in a system that said, oh no, you can only do it this way, that wasn't honoring my spiritual gifts. It wasn't safe to truly be who I was, because it was in this little tiny box that was based off of these toxic systems. And that's not what it is. Like we're all innately connected to this healing light. We're all connected to it. and it's our birthright to be able to use it.
We don't have to do anything to be worthy of it.
No, we already are. It's infinite.
Yeah.
It's there. You always have access to it. And so we have to just deprogram the mind to come back into alignment with that source.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's such a good reminder and such a good journey. And so, I'm just so grateful that you were open to coming on and to talking about all of the levels and the layers of learning and growth and moving those dark nights of the soul into a beautiful purpose of life. And I just feel like for those who are listening in the tribe to also remember that even if you are going through a dark night of the soul, that it is for a time and a purpose and a place. But there's so much more that your soul came here to experience and to learn and to grow. And not only that, your ancestors are cheering you on. You have guides, you have ascended masters. There's so many methods of healing. It's just opening up your heart to look for those ways that really call to you. So speaking of which, Cynthia, you have Discovering Divinity as your platform and your business. So do you want to discover and to share more about that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you've heard a little bit of my story, and that really has, created this passionate space for me to serve on the planet. And as I've gone through a lot of these really dark places, it's been my soul calling to come into a space where I can walk side by side with individuals so that they can peel back many of those illusions and those layers, those masks of lies that have, disconnected for just a moment individuals to source and their innate enoughness and that pure love source. And so as we do that, as we get into the subconscious and unconscious layers, we're able to really dive into some of those spaces, but essentially come through and be empowered. And when you're plugged into that alignment, I really could say that, the possibilities are limitless. And that's some of my most passionate work, is working one-on-one with individuals, whether we work with the inner child, we tune into ancestors, we connect with loved ones, but also really diving into some of those experiences of shadow work, as well as the dark night of the soul. And so I love being able to facilitate that as an intuitive guide. I also, with discoveringdivinity.com, I've got an online platform where I host holistic healing courses and a free community class that we enjoy every single month. And so if you are into holistic healing, I'm here to support you with all kinds of coaches and healers. Jen's, thankfully been on my community, and she's shared her story and some really neat things. And so I'd love to have you be a part of that. So you can go to discoveringdivinity.com and get connected with the community there. So
Absolutely. And all in the show notes, of course, have your website and different ways for people to get a hold of you as well. So
wonderful.
I just wanted to thank you so much, Cynthia, for your time. And I know it can be nerve-wracking stepping into different places and sharing really intimate spaces of the heart. But that's where, that's where we make the biggest difference. And so I just wanted to thank you for that. And I just feel so honored. So thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jen.
Do you feel called to connect to your medicine within? Have you wanted to strengthen your spiritual gifts? Are you looking for ways to incorporate the sacred into your everyday life? Maybe do you want to have like-minded friends in a tribe who can connect with you? Modern Sage's Soul Tribe is dedicated to spiritual seekers like yourself who are embracing the medicine within. Now, in this tribe, we are going to be doing moon gatherings, amazing spiritual gift giveaways, connecting to a soul tribe, as well as hosting mystery school classes. If you are feeling called to connect to the Soul Tribe, I will leave a link for you in the show notes. Thank you so much for listening to Modern Sages Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel or follow us online. Blessings.